Hello everyone, it's time for a video, okay, so Red vs. Blue Family Shatters has just wrapped up, well not just, it wrapped up about almost a week ago at this point, but I do have to say, as much as I hated Season 18 Zero, it was absolute garbage, except for the fight scenes were amazing, but I pretty much didn't like everything else except for maybe the phase East and West dynamic, but that was it. I feel like it's definitely not as good as anything else RVB, even the Shizno Paradox. I actually really like the Shizno Paradox. Um, it's not as good as any of those, but it's definitely a step in the right direction, and I can definitely say that I enjoy the vast majority of these episodes, if not all of them, to some extent. Some of them way less than others, but I guess that's what we're going to get to now. So there's a total of 11 episodes of the series, so let's get into it. Number 11 in last place is Buzzkill. So for me, this episode is just kind of boring. Like, the premise just is kind of lame. Oh my god, there's a wasp, and and the people who are very tough and, like, they're so good at everything, right? They're afraid of the wasp. So there's some humor in that, but there's not really much substance to this episode, really. They just run away from the wasp, and the one thing that's actually their weakness, including the Mary Sue's, is this wasp. The only somewhat funny thing in this episode, really, is the thing with Raymond near the end, where he jokes about making puns about insects. That was like one of the only funny things, and I feel like what this spin-off focuses on the most is Phase and East. Like, they're in pretty much every episode with major importance. So I feel like that's the team's favorite character or characters, but because I just feel like they have way more time on screen than anyone else, really, which is kind of unfortunate because they were the characters I actually liked in the original season. So they do make a lot of the other characters more likable, though. Like, I used to despise One in season 18, and now she's not. I don't really like her that much, but like, she's definitely tolerable. Number 10 is Fazes' reputation. So this one is also just kind of boring. So like I said, it focuses on a character that I already kind of liked. So I mean, it's good that it's good that Phase and East have focused. I think they just had way too much in contrast to the other characters. But this one's decent. I mean, there's nothing really bad about it, but like, I just can't say it made me laugh out loud. It was just kind of like, wow, I guess Phase is more down to earth than they think. Like, there's not really much memorable things from this episode for me. I do like the conversation at the very beginning between Axel and One about English and French. But, you know, and Zero, too. That's one thing I'll mention. I despised Zero. He went from being the worst character in the season to, in these shorts, he's probably my favorite, if not behind Axel. It's either him or Axel who's at the top of these for these shorts. He's better when they play him off for laughs, cause he's so cheesy, it's funny. But like, in season 18, they just took him way too seriously. Oh, number 9 is the premiere episode. So this one, this one was, I enjoyed it. Like, okay, you have to think, going straight from Zero to this, because anything in Family Shatters, even the episodes that I dislike more than others, like, they're still miles better than anything that was in the original Zero season. So this was, like, when I first watched it, it was just so awesome. Even though it's like kind of just a mediocre episode, it's not bad, but it's just kind of mediocre. I love the introduction of the cat. Um, but that's pretty. And I love. There's some jokes in here that I do like. Particularly one where Raymond mentions watering his weapons. I know that sounds weird out of context, but if you've seen the show, um, I think you'll understand what I'm talking about. That's one thing they do, because Raymond wasn't funny really at all in season 18, but he's likable here. I like him here. Yeah. There's not really much that I want to say about this episode. I don't really like the cliche of just like West is so against pets because he's a father figure. Like that was just kind of lame, and that was kind of the premise was West not wanting to get one, and then he's against the rest of the group. But then on the other hand, I like the joke in which one failed to take care of Tiny's fish, and then she kind of resents her for it. That was pretty funny, but there's nothing else that I can really say. Like these are so short too that I can't really say that much about them. All right, so at number 8 we have beach episode. This episode I feel like is the most. It goes from being funny to not funny at all to being funny to not funny at all to being funny again. Like there's so many jokes that I just don't find funny, or like they don't really treat them as major jokes, but there's so many interactions that I don't really find funny, but then there's some that I do as well. Like I love the one at the end where they run out of budget. uh but I also hate how they censored fuck, which is something that Red versus Blue should never do, because Red versus Blue is pretty much notorious for its swearing. You can't really have Red versus Blue and censored swearing. That's kind of not a thing. So I wasn't really a fan of that. Um, but I loved Raymond being kind of like a weeb kind of. He's like, oh my god, it's time for a beach episode, and he goes through all the stereotypes, and then he also breaks the fourth wall too. That's the thing. Like Raymond is funny in these, and I appreciate Raymond's comedy here. All right, so as for number 7, we have the one with the escape room. Now, yet another episode where I think Raymond shines the most. So maybe Raymond has the most focus. Like, it's either Raymond or FaZe and East. Like, this one I really like because it's basically just Raymond being so introverted and he just doesn't feel like he belongs with the rest of the team. And I love his little thing with one about the technology rant where he's like, what, you don't respond when I send you memes? Like, I know these things probably don't sound funny when I say them, but when you watch them in the episode, in contrast with everything else, it's funny. So that's why I don't really know why I'm reviewing this. I mostly just want to do a ranking. Okay, number 6 is Freaky Friday. So this is the episode where FaZe and East are split into two, and they try and get back into their own bodies. The interactions with all the characters, they have one with Axel, Raymond, West, and one. They have one with all of them. I think all of them are actually decently funny. The West one in particular I really liked, but I did like all the interactions overall. And that was the most important thing about this series, was seeing how the characters interacted without constantly being thrown a fight scene every 10 seconds. So I think this show did that well overall. And one thing I'll mention is at the beginning of the episode when FaZe is in bed, or East, you see a statue of Carolina, which was a nice Easter egg because you don't see any OG characters in this series except for one episode, which I will get to. Alright, as for number 5, we have Hard Boiled. Now, I love this episode, honestly. Like, the beginning is kind of slow. It's kind of just like, oh yeah, father figure interacting with everyone else. Yeah. Like this, it's not really funny. But when it goes into the black and white stuff with with the classic like TV investigative stuff, it's just so good at it's so good at doing that stereotype, but in red versus blue form. Especially with West. I think West was the perfect lead for this. And it's pretty much the only focus episode that he really has. So, yeah. And one thing I'll mention is Diesel. He like never appears in these. He appears in this one, and he appears in two more, I think. But all he says throughout those is just the word "die." That's it. He didn't have any character development in season 18, and no character development here. So yeah, I think he's definitely dead and never coming back, because they never even developed him in the slightest. Alright, as for number 4, we have the unbearable lightness of Zero. Zero is really well done in these shorts because in this episode it focuses on him and what he does in his off time, basically. And that's the thing. They make him so cheesy, and he's so cheesy with everything he says, and he's just so weird that it's super funny to just witness what he's like when he's not constantly beating the shit out of everyone. And he's not just a one-dimensional character with zero motivation. Okay, number 3, Walk and Talk. So this one, I originally probably would have put a lot lower on the list, but rewatching it for this list, I enjoyed it more than I did on my first watching, which is kind of weird for these, because like they're only really 3 to 5 minutes. So you wouldn't think there'd be anything that really would make me change my mind on it, but I don't know. I just liked it a lot more. It again has the funny over the top Zero, and he says the word "stan." So I mean, that was funny in and of itself. I think there's way too many like pop culture references, but at the same time, that's what kind of makes it funny as well. And this is funny how Diesel just doesn't appear here. It's just Zero and Phase, which is just funny again because they're basically just admitting that Diesel isn't a character. But yeah, I actually really enjoyed it. The conversations were better than I originally thought. Okay, now on to my favorite 2. So number 2 is Night of the Living Dad, episode 2. So this one is the best out of the main 10 episodes by far, okay? The concept of Axel making constant dad jokes to the point where he goes insane and they have to stage an intervention, that is just an awesome concept to me. So that's what makes Axel probably my favorite of the Shatter Squad crew. Pretty much all the dad jokes are so unfunny that they're funny. So this is one of the episodes where just probably the only episode actually where pretty much all the humor lands. There's not really a lot of unfunny jokes, which in a lot of the episodes there's at least a couple that are just kind of eh. But this one I think was really consistent with the jokes and was more it was closer. Nothing in this made me laugh as hard as OG RVB did, but this one came the closest. And as for number 1, I mean, what else could it be? Special Guestmas, the Christmas special. Like, why would this not be number 1? You see Sarge, you see Lopez, and you see Santa, all of which, especially Sarge, are well written. They're in character. They're not destroyed like Tucker was in season 18. So, I mean, just seeing those characters again is just awesome. I'm gonna be honest, that's the only thing that's putting this at number 1, though, is seeing those OG characters, because nothing that the other characters say is really funny. Nothing that Shatter Squad says. I did like the interaction, the brief one between Sarge and West. I also liked when Zero came in and crashed the party, and he was like, "I brought some cheap gift cards." That was honestly a funny joke, but yeah, other than that, nothing really special from the new cast. But just seeing the OG characters is enough to put this at number 1, because I hope we see them in season 19 for at least brief appearances, but I doubt we will. So that's just saddening, but at least we got to see them. Or some of them in some capacity, and the cameo of not Simmons but Gus himself was just, it was funny. I don't know why they couldn't have threw Simmons in there, but I mean Gus was fine too. So my overall thoughts on the show as a whole, miles and miles better than Zero. Okay, I'd give Zero a 3 out of 10. And that's no disrespect to any of the animators. The animators did an amazing job. But that's the only thing giving it scores. The story or anything they try to set up, or maybe a 4 out of 10, because they try and set some stuff up, but they didn't have enough time to execute any of it, really. So I think if they're given more time to develop the storylines that they tried to set up with, like, AOD, Axel being one's father, and just who the AOD are in general, I mean, if they develop that more, I'd really like that. But, I mean, this was, miles better than Zero. Focusing more on comedy is always better than just pure action and nonsensical plot, but I am excited to get back into the story, because I feel like that's when Red vs. Blue is at its best. When it's not pure comedy, but it's not pure action, it has to be a tiny bit of action, story, and comedy. That's the RVB formula. So, yeah, overall, I'd give this probably a 6 out of 10, keeping in mind that almost everything RVB I would put as either 9 or 10 out of 10s. So a 6 out of 10 is still a good score, but it just doesn't really hold up to anything else RVB. Yeah. That's pretty much all I wanted to say. See ya.